So when asked if I would like to be involved in today's session and told what the topic was, it got me thinking. This is not something that I really thought about. How do I go about making decisions? What is the decision-making process? So what I thought I'd do today is to kind of use the last few years of my personal experience and give you some examples of the process that we've kind of been through, and actually highlighting then the key decision-making processes and how we've used both intuition, gut feel, but also a lot of data as well. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I've been Chief Executive of TT Electronics for the last 2.5 years. Before that, I was with Cisco in a number of leadership positions in engineering and sales. I was acquired by them back in 1999 at the height of the tech bubble, very good times, where I was based in Milan in Italy running the Pirelli worldwide telecoms business. So let me just take a little bit of background about TT. So this was run as a conglomerate. This is a business that's involved and had been involved in so many different areas. It was operating in 17 countries. It had 35 locations. It was manufacturing everything from specialized components to sensors to compounds to fasteners. They had a bottling plant, a whole array of products and technologies scattered throughout the world. The company went through a sort of first phase of trying to become a more focused electronic company by changing its name. And they did that about 10 years ago. But obviously, changing the name is one thing. They sold some of the businesses off at that time as they tried to become more focused. But really, the behavior of the business didn't change. They still operated as a conglomerate. So the board decided that they needed a change, and they needed a change of direction, and they brought myself in, back in August 2008. Timing is everything. 2008, if you all remember, was a time of enormous change. The first challenge we had to do, and I said we because we had a new FD at the same time, which is quite an interesting position to find, was to really understand what do we have within the business. How do you actually make decisions when you have so many different businesses in so many different markets, in so many different locations? Historical data wasn't going to help us, because the world was changing so rapidly at that time. So we can't base any sort of key decisions on that historical data. And things were moving very, very quickly. The markets were beginning to slow down. We had to make decisions and make decisions fast. So we went out and really looked at a framework to be able to analyze each business quickly and base key decisions on a number of fundamentals. It was all about data collection. We quickly realized that gut feel was just going to be just too dangerous to understand businesses where we had no understanding whatsoever. We also saw that the past in decisions had been made based on someone's particular knowledge of a particular industry, not about the potential for growth or business growth within that business. So we started with a framework of looking at all of our business in turn with a clear framework around the customer. That's where we started it from, and that's continued to this day. So it's a consistent methodology, understanding where the customer is in its marketplace, where the customer is going, where your technology fits into that customer. Do you have the right opportunity pipeline going forward? So trying to look as much as you possibly can as the forward-looking data points, clearly not the historical data points. And we spent about 3 or 4 months going through a very detailed review, business by business, using the common methodology, all linked around the customer. Again, all forward-looking data. That was the key at this point where the world was changing so rapidly. We went to the market in 2009, in January 2009, and laid out this new strategy. At that time, we didn't know what the hell was going on in the world. A lot of our industries that we were involved with had virtually stopped. And how do we make sure that the strategy we were coming out with was right for not just the current conditions that we were in, but the future as well? And I think a lot of it is around, again, we were confident through the customer interaction that we had and the information we were receiving from the customer, the technology position. We also run, and I think it's still very pertinent today, is run scenarios. We just wanted to understand if we shape the business in different ways, what sort of impact would that have on the results going forward? So tracking 3 to 4 years out, looking at different options. So by the time we came to the market and the time we took the board through all this, we were pretty confident that we've gone through all the various scenarios, we've got good forward-looking data, and the strategy was the right one. Now, fortunately for us, 2 years, or just over 2 years later, that strategy remains in place. It still is the right one. We were one of the FTSE top 10 all-performing shares last year, and our share price has risen about 600% since we announced that strategy. We've gone back and tested it a number of times, and I think that's very important. You keep retesting it. One of the other key things that we did as we went through this process is, one thing, having a strategy that clearly frameworks the decisions, but you need something else. And what we did was to look at what are the values that we need within the company if we're going to implement the strategy. So that the decision-making becomes much, much easier if you can frame it around a very clear strategy, but also a key set of principles. So we wanted to drive that consistency through the organization about these are the values that we expect, and this is the strategy that we're following. And at all times, the way I look at it is to do a checkpoint to make sure that what we said in terms of the strategy is true to the values that we're driving through the organization. The customer metrics become absolutely critical. And it's customer metrics, again, not just about the basic metrics, about your book-to-bill ratios and so on, but it's trying to get as much forward-looking data as you possibly can. We've been building up a very rich CRM system to really understand as much as we can about our customers. And we look in our business, we do a lot of specialized components that can be at a very early design stage of some engineering cycle. And that could last 2 or 3 years. So you want to make sure that you're building the pipeline for the future and making sure that you can convert that pipeline. So it's all about forward-looking information, forward-looking data that allow you to understand where the business was going or is going. So I've talked about kind of the business-making sort of process that we went through. What about the CEO himself specifically? I think you can't separate the two. Clearly, the strategy comes from the top. It's worked through the rest of the organization. And you have to drive your own personal values as well as the company values. And if you do this in a consistent basis, what you'll find is a very effective organization. I sort of my own quote, operations are more effective when they see consistency and transparency in decision-making from the top levels of the company. My job becomes much, much easier if people understand what we're making decisions about, why we're making the decisions we are making. Even when you're making extremely tough decisions. And we went through a very significant restructuring 2 years ago, taking lots of people out of the organization. But I can tell you at all times we spent a lot of time communicating the strategy and the values so people could understand the decisions we're making. And even if it was painful, they preferred to have that decision made than uncertainty. That's the most destructive force in any organization is uncertainty. So creating that methodology worked well for us. So for me, the world that we're in today is just too dynamic. You cannot rely on historical data. You cannot rely on gut feel because things are moving so rapidly, particularly if you work on a global level as well. So it's good data points, but it's all about capturing what the customer wants, not for today, but for the next 2 to 3 years. And if we do that, we can put ourselves in a very strong position.